This is a story about worth, not the kind you count in silver dollars, though there's some of that too. It's about the worth we carry inside us when nobody else can see it. The worth that stays even when folks look right through you like you're made of window glass. I wrote this for those of you who've ever stood somewhere you didn't belong, holding something precious, waiting for just one person to recognize what you had to offer. Maybe that was a long time ago. Maybe it was yesterday. Either way, I think you'll understand this young woman and the quiet cowboy who stopped long enough to really look. Pull up a chair, pour yourself some coffee. This one takes its time, the way good stories should. The auctioneer's voice cracked across the yard like a whip snapping above cattle. Sold $14 to the man in the brown hat. Dust rose from the livestock pens in slow curtains, catching the early morning light. Thornton's auction yard smelled of manure and chewing tobacco and the particular sourness of men who'd ridden hard through the night to get there. Coffee grounds burned somewhere nearby. Someone had left a pot on the fire too long. 100 voices haggled and cursed and laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny. She stood apart from all of it. 3 saddles lay on a Navajo blanket at her feet, the wool's red and black pattern bright against the trampled dirt. The saddles themselves were something else entirely. Leather worked so fine it seemed to breathe. Silver conchos catching light like small moons. Stitching so even you'd swear a machine had done it, except machines couldn't make anything this alive. She didn't call out her wares. Didn't smile at passing men. She simply stood there, hands loose at her sides, watching the crowd with eyes that expected nothing good. A man in a sweat-stained shirt stopped, looked down at the saddles, looked at her. $2, he said. For the lot. She shook her head once. He snorted. Suit yourself, then, and walked away. Another man, older, gut straining his vest buttons. He nudged one saddle with his boot toe like it might bite him. $1.50, more than they're worth, you ask me. The same single shake of her head. Indian goods, he muttered to his companion as they moved on. Can't never trust the quality. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, just kept standing there like she'd grown roots into the hard-packed earth. The morning sun pressed against her shoulders. Sweat gathered at her temples. She didn't wipe it away. 20 feet distant, leaning against a split-rail fence, a man rolled a cigarette between his fingers. He'd been there nearly half an hour. Yet, the cigarette stayed unlit. Silas Cade had come to Thornton's for a pack mule. He'd found the mule an hour ago, paid for it, left it in the holding pen, but he hadn't left. He couldn't stop watching her, not because she was beautiful, though perhaps she was. He hadn't let himself think that far. It was the stillness, the way she stood in the middle of all this noise and heat and rudeness, like she existed in a different kind of weather, like nothing here could touch her because she'd already survived worse. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself, years ago. The cigarette paper tore in his fingers. He let the tobacco fall to the dirt. Then he pushed off the fence and walked across the yard. She saw him coming. Her shoulders tightened, just barely, just enough that someone watching close would notice. She was calculating, measuring him the way you'd measure a horse you weren't sure about. He stopped 3 feet away, didn't speak. Instead, he crouched down on his heels and picked up the nearest saddle. It was heavier than it looked. The tree was solid, not the cheap cottonwood some makers used, but something denser, carefully chosen. He turned it, checking the balance, ran his thumb along a line of stitching where the leather curved around the cantle. The hide smelled of neat's foot oil and careful hands. Someone had rubbed this leather every day for years. His father had made saddles, long time ago, before the drink took him. Silas knew good work when he held it. This wasn't good work. This was exceptional. He looked up at her. Her face gave nothing away. But he saw her hands. They'd curled into loose fists at her sides. Who taught you to set a tree this true? Quanto? The question hung between them, around them. The auction continued its chaos, men shouting, animals protesting, the auctioneer's relentless chant. But right here, in this small space, everything went quiet. She didn't answer for a long moment. He waited. He was good at waiting. "My grandmother," she finally said. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, roughened at the edges like leather that had seen weather. "Then my mother. Then nobody." He set the saddle down carefully, the way you'd set down something that mattered. "3 generations," he said. She didn't confirm it, didn't need to. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, worn soft from years of handling. He loosened the drawstring and began counting out silver dollars onto the Navajo blanket, one by one. The coins caught the light as they fell, ringing soft against each other. She watched his hands, then his face, then his hands again. He stopped at 32. "That's what they're worth," he said. She didn't move to pick up the money. "You don't haggle," she said. "Ain't nothing to haggle about." He met her eyes. "Price is the price." Something shifted in her expression, not softening. Exactly, but a kind of careful attention. Like she was looking at a trail she'd never seen before and trying to decide if it led somewhere safe. "Why?" she asked. He stood up, brushing dust from his knees. The morning heat was building now, and somewhere behind them a horse whinnied sharp and high. "Because my father made saddles once, and I know what it costs to make something this good." He paused, and his voice dropped lower. "And because nobody else in this whole yard bothered to pick one up. If this story found you on a quiet afternoon, we'd be glad to know where you're listening from. Sometimes the best company is knowing someone else is out there, sharing the same tale." She still hadn't touched the money. 32 silver dollars lay on the Navajo blanket between them, bright against the red and black wool. The auction noise pressed in from all sides, cattle lowing, men arguing over mule prices, the auctioneer's voice gone hoarse but still carrying. She looked at the coins, the way you'd look at a snake you weren't sure was dead yet. "I got a place," Silas said. 3 days west of here. Ranch needs work, fences down, tack falling apart. Things I've been letting go too long." He paused. "I need someone who knows leather, knows horses, someone with hands that can fix what's broken before it breaks worse." Her eyes came up to his face, searching, measuring. "You're offering me work. Room and board, fair wage on top of it, 1-month trial if it don't suit you. You leave, no questions. And if it suits you but not me, then you still leave." He shrugged. "Ain't a prison, just a ranch that needs tending." Whilst a wagon rattled past behind him, wheels grinding against packed dirt. She didn't look at it. Her attention stayed fixed on his face like she was reading something written there in a language she almost understood. "What happened to the last person?" she asked. Silas felt his jaw tighten. The question was fair. He'd have asked the same. "Left for California," he said. "Last spring. Most folks do, sooner or later. But you stayed." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Someone's got to." She looked down at the saddles. Her grandmother's work, her mother's, her own. 3 lives stitched into leather and silver in careful, patient hours. She'd carried them 200 miles to sell them to men who couldn't tell a masterwork from a mail-order fake. And now this stranger with quiet eyes and work-rough hands was offering her something nobody had offered in a long time. A choice. She knelt and gathered the coins, one by one, dropping them into the leather pouch he'd left on the blanket. The weight of them felt strange in her palm. Earned, not taken, given, not grudged. She stood. "When do we leave? Sun up tomorrow. I got a mule to collect and supplies to buy." He turned to go, then stopped. "I didn't catch your name." She hesitated just a breath, just long enough for him to notice. "Winona." He nodded once and walked away into the crowd. She watched him go, the pouch heavy in her hand, a question forming in her chest she couldn't quite shape into words yet. They left at first light. The town disappeared behind them within an hour, swallowed by the rolling brown hills that stretched west toward mountains she couldn't yet see. Silas rode ahead, his mule tied to a lead rope, loaded with supplies wrapped in canvas. Winona followed 10 feet back, riding the sorrel mare he'd bought her the evening before. She sat one of her own saddles, her mother's work. The mare moved differently beneath her than any horse she'd borrowed or stolen rides on over the past 2 years. Smoother, more settled. The saddle fit the animal like it had been made for her. And maybe in some way, it had, her mother always said, a good saddle finds its horse eventually. Silas didn't try to make conversation. He rode with his shoulders loose, his hat pulled low against the morning glare, checking behind him every mile or so, not watching her, exactly, just making sure she was still there. By noon, the sun pressed down hard and flat, baking the smell of sage and dry grass out of the earth. They stopped in the thin shade of a rock outcropping. The horses drinking from the canteens Silas poured into his upturned hat. He handed her jerky and hardtack without ceremony. She took it without thanks. They ate in silence. The wind moved through the dry grass around them, making a sound like whispered counting. When they mounted up again, he noticed her checking the mare's hooves before she swung into the saddle. Each hoof lifted, examined, set down. Nobody had told her to do that. He filed the observation away and kept riding. The first night they made camp beside a narrow creek, cottonwoods offering broken shade against the fading light. Silas gathered wood, started a fire, set beans to cook in a battered tin pot. The smoke carried the smell of mesquite and salt pork, the familiar routine of trail meals, something he'd done 1,000 times alone. When he looked up, Winona had his spare saddle across her lap. Her fingers moved along the cinch strap, finding a place where the leather had worn thin enough to see daylight through. She hadn't asked. She'd simply seen and started fixing. He watched her work in the firelight. Her hands moved with the same certainty he'd seen at the auction yard, no hesitation, no wasted motion. Like the leather told her what it needed and she just listened. "You see things before they break," he said. She didn't look up. "Have to. Nobody else gonna see 'em for me." Her fingers kept working, finding a piece of spare leather in her saddlebag, cutting it precise, stitching it over the worn spot with thread she must have carried for exactly this purpose. The needle caught firelight each time it rose. He turned back to the beans and didn't ask anything else. The second day passed quieter than the first. The land changed around them flatter, drier, the grass turning from green to gold. They crossed 2 dry creek beds and one that still held water, stopped to let the horses drink while the sun reached its peak. That night, they camped near a stand of junipers, the air sharp with their scent. The fire crackled low between them. Coffee steamed in tin cups, bitter and strong, the way trail coffee always tasted when you'd been riding all day. Silas found himself talking without planning to. "Had a horse once," he said. "Good horse. Bay gelding, white star on his forehead. Lost him to colic last spring." Winona looked up from the cup she held between her palms. "That why you ride careful like that?" she asked, checking every few miles. He blinked. He hadn't realized she'd noticed. "Reckon so," he said. She nodded once and looked back at the fire. Didn't offer sympathy. Didn't ask questions. Just let the words sit there between them, acknowledged and left alone. He found himself grateful for that. The third morning came cool and clear, mist rising from the low places like the land was breathing. They broke camp early, rode through the fog until it burned away. And by midday, the country had opened up into a wide valley with mountains rising blue and distant to the north. "There," Silas said, pointing. The ranch sat at the base of a gentle slope, sheltered by a stand of aspens going gold at their edges. A house, a barn, a smaller building that might have been a bunkhouse. Corrals fanning out in weathered wooden lines. From this distance, it looked almost painted something from a picture book, quiet and still. As they got closer, the picture changed. The barn door hung crooked on its track. Fence posts tilted at angles that spoke of years without repair. The windmill's vanes stuck at half-mast, metal groaning in the afternoon breeze. The house itself stood solid enough, but paint peeled from its boards in long curling strips. She could see what the place had been. She could see what it had become. Silas reined up at the main gate, rusted hinges protesting as he pushed it open. "Ain't much to look at," he said. "Not anymore." Winona rode through the gate and stopped beside him. Her eyes moved across the property, cataloging, calculating. Her hands stayed still on the reins, But her mind was already working. The barn door, the fence posts, the windmill, the well rope fraying near the pulley, a dozen things broken or breaking, waiting for someone to notice. She looked at Silas. He was watching her face, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't expected. His shoulders dropped an inch, and he exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath without knowing it. The house smelled of wood smoke and dust, and something else underneath old coffee grounds, lamp oil gone stale, the particular stillness of rooms that hadn't heard voices in too long. Silas led her through the front room without ceremony. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold ashes still piled in its mouth. 2 chairs sat facing it, one with a worn cushion, one without. A table by the window held a kerosene lamp and a Bible with a cracked spine, its pages yellowed at the edges. "Kitchen's through here," he said, pushing open a door. "Pump works. Stove needs feeding twice a day or she goes cold." The kitchen was small but clean enough. Cast iron pans hung from hooks above the stove. A blue enamel coffee pot sat on the counter, dented at the rim. Through the window she could see the barn, its crooked door a dark slash against the weathered wood. He crossed to a narrow door on the far wall and opened it. "This'll be yours." The room was barely bigger than a horse stall. A bed with an iron frame, covered by a patchwork quilt in faded blues and greens. A washstand with an enamel basin and a small mirror above it. The silver backing spotted with age. One window faced east, the glass wavy with years. She stepped inside. The floorboards creaked beneath her boots. "Belonged to my mother," Silas said from the doorway. "The quilt. She made it." Winona touched the fabric. The stitches were uneven in places, made by hands less practiced than her own. But the pattern held together. Someone had put care into this, years ago. "Breakfast is early," Silas said. "Rest is up to you." He left her there. She sat on the bed and listened to his footsteps fade through the house. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling something loose against the barn wall. A horse nickered in the corral. Then silence. She lay down without undressing, the quilt rough against her cheek. The ceiling above her was unpainted wood, dark with age. She counted the knots in the grain until her eyes grew heavy. Sleep came in pieces. She woke at every sound the house settling, a coyote calling somewhere distant, the wind shifting direction. Each time she listened for footsteps outside her door. Each time they didn't come. When the first gray light touched her window, she was already awake. She rose and found the kitchen empty, the stove cold. But the coffee pot sat on the counter with fresh grounds inside, and a note in a cramped hand, pumps primed, back by noon. She built a fire in the stove, filled the pot from the pump, and set it to boil. The water smelled of iron and limestone well water, good and cold. While the coffee heated, she found a tin of biscuits in the cupboard, hard but edible. She ate 2 standing at the window, watching the light spread across the ranch. Then she went outside. The morning air held a bite to it, cool enough that her breath showed faint white. Dew clung to the grass around the house, soaking through her boots as she walked. She moved without hurrying, letting her eyes do the work. The main gate first. She had noticed it yesterday the way it dragged when Silas pushed it open, the hinge pulling loose from the post. She crouched down and examined it. 2 screws missing entirely, a third stripped and useless. The wood around the holes had gone soft with rot. She went to the barn. The crooked door defeated her, for now it needed new track hardware she didn't have. But in a corner she found a coffee tin full of old screws and nails, rusted but usable. A hand drill hung on a nail nearby, its bit dull but functional. Back at the gate, she cleared out the rotted wood with her knife, packed the holes tight with splinters, and set new screws at an angle that would hold. The work took her hands, remember themselves, the particular pressure needed, the way wood spoke back when you treated it right. When she finished, she swung the gate open and closed, smooth, silent, holding true. Her palm rested flat against the wood, warm from the morning sun now, solid. She'd fixed things all her life. Saddles for selling, harnesses for trade, other people's broken equipment for a few coins and a place to sleep. Always for something, always toward leaving. This was the first time she'd fixed something just because it was broken, and she was there. "You're up early." She turned. Silas stood on the porch, coffee cup in hand, watching her. "Gate was loose," she said. "I know." He took a sip, his eyes on the repaired hinge. "Been meaning to fix it." "It's fixed." He was quiet for a moment. The steam from his cup rose and disappeared in the cool air. Somewhere behind the barn, a rooster finally remembered to crow. "Come on inside," Silas said. "Coffee's still hot." He turned and went back through the door. Didn't wait to see if she'd follow. She looked at the gate one more time. Then, at the barn with its crooked door, the water trough with the crack running down one side, the well rope fraying where it looped through the pulley, a dozen things waiting. She followed him inside. He poured her a cup from the blue enamel pot and set it on the table without comment. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the heat seep into her fingers. The coffee smelled of chicory and wood smoke, strong enough to stand a spoon in. "The water trough," she said. "How long's it been leaking?" Silas paused with his cup halfway to his mouth. "Couple months, maybe longer." He set the cup down. "Why?" She looked at him across the table. "Because if we don't fix it before the real heat comes, you'll lose half your water to the ground." 2 weeks shaped themselves into a rhythm. Coffee at dawn, the blue enamel pot between them on the kitchen table, steam rising in the cool morning air, then work sometimes together, sometimes apart, depending on what needed doing. Noon rest when the sun pressed down too hard, biscuits and cold water in the shade of the barn, more work until the light went gold and long. Supper, silence, sleep. The barn door came first. Winona found the old track hardware buried under a pile of rusted tools in the back corner, cleaned it with vinegar and sand until the metal gleamed dull silver, rehung the door so it slid smooth and quiet. Silas watched her work for an hour that first morning, saying nothing, then went to mend fence posts on the north pasture, the chicken coop next, wire gone loose, letting foxes dream of easy meals. She pulled it tight, reinforced the corners with scrap wood, patched the holes in the roof where rain had been getting through. The hens complained the whole time, clucking their disapproval at the disruption. She ignored them. The windmill took 3 days. The vein had seized up where rust had welded metal to metal. She climbed the ladder twice a day, working oil into the joints, coaxing movement back into frozen parts. On the third afternoon, the vein caught wind and turned, groaning at first, then smoother. Water began to flow into the trough she'd already patched with pine tar and canvas. Silas came out of the barn when he heard the mechanism running. "Haven't heard that sound in months," he said. She climbed down the ladder and wiped her hands on her riding skirt. "Needed cleaning, that's all." He nodded once and went back to whatever he'd been doing. The supply run to town came on a Wednesday. They rode in together, the wagon loaded with empty feed sacks and a short list of necessities. The town was called Miller's Crossing, a single street of buildings leaning toward each other like tired old men, a general store, a blacksmith, a small white church with a steeple that needed paint. People stared. She felt their eyes as she walked beside Silas toward the general store. Women on porches stopped their conversations mid-sentence. Men outside the blacksmith turned to watch, hammers going still. A cluster of ranch hands near the water trough nudged each other and muttered things she couldn't hear and didn't want to. She kept her gaze forward and her hands loose at her sides. Inside the store, a man with a leather apron looked up from his ledger. His eyes moved from Silas to her, then back again. The shop smelled of flour and tobacco and the sharp tang of pickle brine from the barrel near the door. "Cade," he said. "Been a while." "Month or so." Silas set the list on the counter. "Need these filled." "This is the man Harold," according to the sign above the door, picked up the list and studied it like it contained secrets. His eyes kept drifting toward Winona. "She staying long?" he asked Silas, not looking at her. "Long as she wants." Harold's mouth tightened, but he gathered the supplies without further comment, measured out flour and sugar into paper sacks, counted nails into a tin box. Winona stood by the window and watched the street outside, the stairs that looked away when she met them. On the ride back, Silas said, "They'll get used to you." She didn't answer. Getting used to wasn't the same as accepting, and they both knew it. That evening, she found him on the porch struggling with a bridle. The leather had cracked along the cheek piece, and the bit was orange with rust. His fingers fumbled at the buckles, too large and too impatient for the delicate work. She sat down beside him on the worn boards and held out her hand. He passed the bridle over without argument. She turned it in her hands, assessing the damage. The leather was old, but good quality. It had just been neglected too long. The rust on the bit would need vinegar and sand, same as the track hardware. The cracked pieces could be replaced if she cut carefully from the parts that had survived. She began taking it apart, piece by piece, laying each component on the porch boards between them. The evening air smelled of hay and horse and the faint sweetness of the aspens turning gold in the distance. Silas watched her hands move. "Where'd you learn all this?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Survival." "That ain't an answer." Her fingers paused on a buckle. "It's the only one I got." He was quiet for a moment. The light was going purple at the edges, the sun dropping behind the mountains to the west. Somewhere in the pasture, a horse nickered soft and low. "My pa drank," Silas said. "Drank himself gone by the time I was 15. Left me this place and a whole lot of nothing else." He picked up one of the bridle pieces, turned it over in his work-rough hands. "I know something about doing for yourself when nobody else will." She looked at him then. His face was turned toward the mountains, the fading light catching the lines around his eyes. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was just putting something on the table between them. A trade, maybe, a small truth for a small truth. "My mother died when I was 12, she said. "Sickness took her. My grandmother raised me after that. Taught me everything she knew." She fitted two pieces of the bridle back together, testing the connection. "When she passed, there was nobody left to teach me anything. So I taught myself." Silas nodded slowly. They sat in silence as the darkness came on, the bridle taking shape again under her hands, the first stars appearing one by one overhead. Then from somewhere down the road, the sound of hoofbeats. 3 horses, maybe 4, moving fast. Silas stood up, his hand moving toward his belt. Winona set down the bridle and rose beside him, watching the dust cloud approach in the failing light. 3 riders emerged from the dust cloud. The dying light caught the silver on their saddles, the white patches on their horses. Big men on big animals, riding like they owned the road and everything on either side of it. Silas's hand stayed near his hip, not reaching, just ready. The riders slowed at the gate Winona had fixed that first morning, and the lead man dismounted. He was thick through the shoulders, gray at the temples, wearing a vest that probably cost more than everything Winona owned. His boots were clean despite the ride. Someone else polished them for him. "Cade." His voice carried the false warmth of a man used to being agreed with. "Been a while since we've seen you in town." "Hollister." Silas didn't move from the porch. "What brings you out this way?" The 2 younger men stayed mounted, sons. From the look of them, same heavy jaw, same way of sitting a horse like they expected it to apologize for existing. Their eyes kept moving to the doorway behind Silas, looking for something, someone. Hollister walked through the gate, leaving it swinging behind him. His boots made soft sounds in the dirt as he approached the porch. "Just being neighborly," he said. "Folks in town have been talking. You know how it is." "Folks can mind their own business," Hollister smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "No, see, that's the thing. When a man lives alone for years and then suddenly has company, well, people notice. People wonder. Wonder what, exactly? About arrangements." Hollister glanced at the barn, the mended fence line, the windmill turning smooth and steady. His eyes narrowed slightly, cataloging the improvements. "About what kind of situation you've got going here." Silas took one step forward. "Say what you came to say, Hollister, or get off my land." The door behind him opened. Winona stepped onto the porch. She'd been listening from the kitchen. Silas could tell by the set of her shoulders, the way her hands hung loose and ready at her sides. She didn't look at him. Her eyes went straight to Hollister. The rancher's smile widened. "Well now, here she is." The two sons shifted in their saddles. One of them muttered something to the other, too low to hear. "Ma'am?" Hollister touched the brim of his hat, the gesture more mockery than courtesy. "I'm sure a lady like yourself would be more comfortable somewhere more suitable. This isn't exactly proper. You understand? A woman of your background, living alone with a man who isn't kin." Winona's face didn't change. "I work here, so I've heard. But see, that's what concerns folks. A man takes in a woman, puts her up in his house, calls it work. I stay here." Hollister's smile flickered. He wasn't used to being interrupted. "No, there's no need to. You heard me the first time." The words hung in the air between them. Sound. One of the sons made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly swallowed. Hollister's eyes went cold. The false friendliness dropped away like a shed skin, revealing something harder underneath. He looked at her the way men had looked at her all her life, measuring, dismissing, trying to find the weakness they could press. She met his gaze and held it. The silence stretched. The windmill creaked overhead. A horse stamped in the corral behind the barn. "Pa." The younger son's voice came low and tight. "Let's go." Hollister didn't move for a long moment. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he wanted to spit out. Then he took one step back. Another. "Town's watching, Cade." His voice had lost its warmth entirely now. "Just remember that people talk, and talk has a way of becoming trouble." He looked at Winona one more time. "For everyone." He turned and walked back to his horse, mounted without haste. His sons wheeled their animals around, waiting for him. "This isn't over," Hollister said from the saddle. "Not by a long sight." They rode off the way they'd come, dust rising behind them like a warning. Silas watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned to Winona. She stood exactly where she'd been standing, feet planted on the worn porch boards, spine straight. But her hands were trembling, just slightly, just enough that he could see. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes." Her voice came out steady despite the trembling. "I did?" He looked at her for a long moment. The last light was fading now, turning the sky purple and orange behind the mountains. Her face was half in shadow, half in fire. "They'll be back," he said. "I know. Might bring others." "I know that too." He nodded slowly. Whatever he'd been expecting when he offered her work at that auction yard, it wasn't this. Wasn't someone who would stand on his porch and stare down a man like Garrett Hollister without flinching. "You should know something," he said, "about Hollister, about why he really came here tonight." Winona turned to face him fully. The trembling in her hands had stopped. "He's been trying to buy this land for 10 years, Silas said, "ever since my father passed. Made offers I couldn't refuse, except I did, every time." He looked out toward the road where the dust was settling. "You fixing this place up, making it worth something again that's not just gossip to him, that's a threat." The sky turned green at the edges 3 hours before the storm hit. Winona saw it first, that particular color that meant trouble coming fast. She was at the corral mending a gate latch when the pressure dropped so sudden her ears popped. The horses felt it too. They moved in tight circles, snorting, ears flattened back. She ran for the house. "Storm coming?" she said, finding Silas on the back porch. "A bad one." He looked at the sky and his face went tight. "Get the horses into the barn. I'll handle the hay." They moved without talking after that. Words cost time they didn't have. The wind came first, not the gentle breeze of afternoon, but a roaring wall of air that nearly knocked her sideways. She got 3 horses into the barn before the rain started. Fat drops that hit like pebbles against her face and hands. The 4th horse, the sorrel mare. Her mare now panicked at the thunder and reared back, jerking the lead rope from Winona's grip. She chased the animal toward the far corral, mud already forming under her boots. The ground had been dry for weeks. Now it turned to soup in minutes, sucking at her feet with every step. The mare bolted left. Winona cut right to head her off. Her boot caught in a rut hidden beneath the mud. She went down hard, face first into the muck, arms outstretched. the impact driving air from her lungs. Mud filled her mouth, her nose, coated her eyelashes so thick she couldn't see. She pushed herself up on her hands and knees, spitting, gasping, the rain hammering against her back. The mare stood 10 feet away, watching her with wild eyes. Winona tried to stand. Her foot was still trapped. She twisted, pulled, felt the mud release her boot with an obscene sucking bond. When she finally got to her feet, she was covered head to toe in black earth, her hair plastered to her skull, her clothes heavy with it, the taste of dirt and rainwater mixing on her tongue. She looked like something that had crawled out of a grave. The mare let her approach this time. Maybe the sight of her, so thoroughly brought low, made the animal feel less afraid. Winona grabbed the rope with hands she couldn't feel anymore and led the horse to the barn. Silas was there, hauling a tarp over the last haystack. He turned when she came in and stopped dead. She stood in the doorway, dripping mud and water, the mare nickering nervously behind her. The lantern light showed every inch of filth coating her body. She could feel it sliding down her neck, pooling in her collar, grit between her teeth when she tried to swallow. He didn't say anything, just took the mare's rope and led the horse to a stall. "The windmill," she said. Her voice came out raw. She heard it now, a grinding, shrieking sound beneath the thunder. The vane she'd spent 3 days fixing was spinning too fast. Catching wind, it wasn't built to handle. They ran together. The windmill stood at the corner of the property, exposed to the full force of the storm. Rain drove into their faces like needles. Lightning split the sky, and the thunder followed so close behind that the ground shook. Silas grabbed the brake lever, pulled. It didn't move. "Rusted stuck," he shouted over the wind. "I need you on the base. Hold it steady while I climb." She wrapped her arms around the wooden support beam and braced her feet in the mud. Her muscles screamed as the whole structure shuddered with each gust. Above her, Silas climbed the ladder, the wind tearing at his clothes. She couldn't see what he was doing, could only feel the windmill straining against her grip, trying to shake itself apart. Her arms burned, her legs shook. The mud pulled at her boots, trying to drag her down again. Then a grinding metal sound. The vane slowed, stopped. Silas half climbed, half fell down the ladder. He grabbed her arm and they ran for the barn as the sky opened up completely. Inside, the sound of rain on the roof was like 1,000 drummers gone mad. They collapsed against the wall side by side, both of them soaked through to the bone. Winona's muscles twitched with exhaustion. Her lungs heaved for air. She looked down at herself. Mud and water dripped from her chin, her elbows, the ends of her ruined hair. She looked like a drowned creature, worse than drowned. And then she laughed. It came out of nowhere, a sound she hadn't made in so long she almost didn't recognize it. A real laugh, rough and surprised and completely beyond her control. Silas stared at her. "What's funny?" She wiped mud from her face with a muddy hand, which only made it worse. "My grandmother used to say storms show you who runs and who stays." The rain drummed on. The horses shifted in their stalls. The lantern swung on its hook, sending shadows dancing across the walls. "That's so." Silas was watching her face now. "I pass." She looked at him, his hair plastered flat, his shirt soaked through, mud streaking his jaw where he'd wiped it without thinking. He looked as wrecked as she felt. "You stayed," she said. "So did you." The words hung between them, heavier than they should have been. She became aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth coming off his body despite the wet and cold, of the way his eyes hadn't left her face. Then, from outside, another sound beneath the fading thunder, hoofbeats, coming fast up the road. The hoofbeats brought a single rider, the younger Hollister's son, alone, his horse lathered and blowing hard. He didn't dismount, just sat in the rain outside the barn, water streaming down his face, looking at Silas and Winona where they stood in the doorway. "Creek's flooding," he said. His voice cracked on the words. "Pa's cattle are trapped in the south pasture. We need hands." Then he wheeled his horse and rode back into the storm. Silas looked at Winona. She looked back. Neither of them moved. "He's been trying to run you off this land," she said. I know. His cattle aren't your problem. I know that too. But he was already reaching for his saddle. They rode out together into the teeth of the dying storm. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle, but the damage was done. Every creek and gully ran brown with floodwater. The ground, too saturated to hold any more, lightning still flickered on the horizon, moving east. The Hollister spread lay 3 miles south. They found the scene before they reached the main house, 40 head of cattle trapped on a shrinking island of high ground, the creek risen to a river around them. Hollister and his 2 sons worked the water's edge, trying to drive the animals toward a ford that no longer existed. Silas dismounted and waded in without a word. Winona followed. The water hit her thighs, shockingly cold, the current strong enough to make her brace with every step. Mud sucked at her boots. She grabbed the rope Silas threw her and helped stretch it across the narrowest point of the flood, creating a guideline for the cattle to follow. The older Hollister son stopped mid-stride when he saw her in the water. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked at his father. Hollister said nothing, just kept working. They labored for over an hour. No one spoke except to shout directions. Hollister's face was gray with exhaustion, his expensive vest ruined, his clean boots somewhere at the bottom of the creek. His sons moved like machines, beyond tiredness, driven by something deeper than thought. One by one, the cattle crossed. Some had to be hauled bodily through the water. One calf went under, and the younger son dove after it, coming up sputtering with the animal clutched to his chest. When the last cow stumbled onto solid ground, Winona collapsed against a fence post. Her whole body shook. Her hands were raw from the rope, bleeding in places she couldn't feel yet. Hollister stood 20 feet away, chest heaving, staring at the herd he'd nearly lost. Then he looked at her. She met his gaze the way she'd met it on Silas's porch, straight on, without flinching, but she was too tired for defiance now. Too tired for anything except the truth of what had just happened. He'd asked for help. She'd given it. That was all. Hollister's mouth opened, closed. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something that wouldn't go down easy. The rain dripped from his hat brim, running down his face. "I was wrong," he said. "About you." The words came out rough, forced through something that resisted them. He didn't elaborate, didn't explain, just stood there with his ruined clothes and his saved cattle and those 3 words hanging in the air between them. The younger son moved to stand beside his father. His face was pale beneath the mud and water, but he nodded once at Winona. Silas stepped forward, his hand extended toward Hollister, not offering friendship. Not yet, but something else. An acknowledgement. A door cracked open. Hollister took it. Their grip lasted only a moment. Then Hollister turned to Winona. "Miss," he said, "you didn't have to come out here tonight. After what I said." He stopped, swallowed. "The cattle didn't do anything wrong. That's what you'd say, isn't it?" It wasn't a question. She didn't answer it like one. "No," she said. "They didn't." He nodded once, short and sharp, put his hat back on, turned to his sons. "Let's get these animals home." The ride back to Silas's ranch was quiet. The storm had passed entirely now, leaving the sky washed clean, stars appearing one by one overhead. Winona's wet clothes clung to her skin. Her muscles ached. Her hands throbbed where the rope had torn them. But something else sat in her chest too, something she couldn't name. Silas rode beside her, close enough that their stirrups nearly touched. "What you did back there," he said, "coming when you had every reason not to, wasn't about him. I know." He was quiet for a moment. "Still counts." They reached the ranch gate, the gate she'd fixed that first morning, still holding true, and he stopped his horse, turned to face her in the starlight. 5 weeks, he said. "That's how long you've been here." "I know. Trial period ended a while back. Neither of us mentioned it." Her chest tightened. She hadn't let herself think about that. So it did. He looked at her for a long moment. The stars reflected in his eyes. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to give me an honest answer. Are you staying?" The question sat between them in the starlight. Simple words, nothing fancy about them. But Winona felt the weight of what he was really asking, not just about tomorrow or next week, but about something larger, something that had been building since that first morning at the auction yard. She looked at him, at his weathered face, his work-rough hands still holding the reins, his eyes waiting for an answer he clearly wasn't sure he'd like. "You asking?" she said. "I'm asking." She let the silence stretch, not to torment him, just to feel the moment fully. The cool night air on her damp skin, the horse shifting beneath her, the stars overhead, more than she could count. "Then I'm staying." He nodded once, didn't smile, but something in his shoulders eased, and he turned his horse toward the barn without another word. She followed. A week later, she finished the saddle. She'd been working on it in the evenings, after the day's repairs were done. Scraps of leather she'd brought from the auction, thread she'd bought in Miller's Crossing, silver conchos she'd been saving for something that mattered, her grandmother's patterns, her mother's techniques, her own hands, bringing it all together. It was for the sorrel mare. Her mare, now, Silas had said, and she'd taken him at his word. The morning she finished, she carried it out to the corral at dawn. The mare stood quiet while Winona settled the saddle on her back, adjusting the cinch, checking the fit. The leather gleamed in the early light. The stitching ran true and even. 3 generations of knowledge pressed into every seam. Silas found her there an hour later, riding the mare in slow circles around the corral. He leaned against the fence and watched without speaking. When she finally dismounted, he walked over and ran his hand along the saddle's cantle. His fingers traced the pattern she'd tooled into the leather mountains and aspens, the shape of the land around them. "This is the best work I've ever seen," he said. She didn't argue with him. That afternoon, Mrs. Harlan came by, the minister's widow from town, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd heard about the flood, about Winona helping save Hollister's cattle. She brought a pie apple, still warm from the oven, and sat on the porch talking with Silas while Winona pretended to work on the barn door hinges. "Folks are coming around," Mrs. Harlan said, slowly, "but they're coming." Silas grunted something non-committal. "She's good for this place," Mrs. Harlan continued. "Anyone with eyes can see it. The way things are mended now. The way you're not walking around like a ghost anymore." She paused. "Give it time. That's all I'm saying." After she left, Silas brought out a second rocking chair. Winona watched him set it on the porch beside the first one. He didn't explain, just went inside and came back with 2 cups of coffee, handed her one, and sat down. The chairs creaked in different rhythms as they rocked. The sun was dropping toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The aspens had gone full gold now, shimmering in the evening breeze. "Got a letter from my cousin," Silas said, "over in Colorado. He's got a family wife, 3 kids, struggling to make ends meet." Winona sipped her coffee, waited. "He asked if there was work out here, for him and maybe his oldest boy." She turned to look at him. His face was calm, but she could see the question underneath. "What'd you tell him?" Silas was quiet for a moment. The rocking chair creaked. A hawk circled overhead, riding the last warm currents of the day. "Told him we got room," he said. "If he wants it." "We..." The words settled into her chest like something coming home. She looked out at the land, the mended fences, the turning windmill, the barn with its door hanging straight and true, all the broken things she'd fixed since she'd arrived, all the broken things still waiting. "Good," she said. "We could use the help." They sat together as the sun went down, 2 rocking chairs on a porch that needed paint, coffee cooling in their hands. The sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue. The first stars appeared, somewhere in the pasture. The sorrel mare nickered. The sound carried across the quiet land like a question and an answer all at once. Winona rocked her chair and let the silence hold her. Not empty silence, the kind that used to follow her everywhere, pressing down like a weight. This was different. This silence had room in it. Room for tomorrow. Room for whatever came next. She finished her coffee and set the cup on the porch rail. Home, she thought. The word felt strange in her mind. Unfamiliar, but not wrong. There's a stillness that comes after a story like this one. Something tender sitting in the chest. Not quite finished. Not quite ready to leave. The kind of feeling that doesn't ask to be named or understood. Many of us know what it means to carry something valuable that nobody else could see. Some of us have stood in rooms full of people and felt entirely invisible. Perhaps you've waited a long time for someone to look close enough to notice what you had to offer: your work, your heart, the quiet things you've built with your own two hands. We've all known the weight of needing to belong somewhere, of wondering if the next place would finally be the one that held. It's all right if this story stirred something you haven't visited in a while. It's okay to let it rest there, unexamined. Like an old letter you don't need to open just yet. Not everything needs to be resolved. Some things are allowed to simply be felt. Thank you for staying until the last word. It means more than you know.